Hi, welcome to the Ithihasa channel. We saw how Pandu, Dhritarashtra, and Vidura came of age and got married. We also witnessed the wondrous births of the children of Pandu and Dhritarashtra. We also followed Pandu, Madri, and Kunti with the Pandavas in their travels through the Shatashringa mountains, their lives through the Shatashringa mountains, right up till the last day of Pandu and Madri. And then we saw how Kunti and the boys, Pandavas, brought the remains of Pandu and Madri, their father and mother, down from the Shatashringa into the plains of Bharatvarsha, back creating a whole cycle, a full cycle back to the kingdom of Hastinapur, the city of elephants, Hastinapur. That journey took 17 days by foot. Om Namah Shivaya, Om Nagendraya Namaha, Om Ambe Narayana, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Anjaneyaya Namaha, Om Subramanyaya Namaha, Swamiye Sharanamayyappo, Om Guruve Namaha. So Kunti and the Pandavas brought the remains of Pandu down to Hastinapur, the city of elephants. They were accompanied by outworldly rishis who commanded a presence about them. And after introducing the boys and Kunti and discussing the events that led to Pandu's death, these rishis vanished into thin air. And hearing about the death of Pandu, a deathly silence came around the people who had gathered at the gates of Hastinapur. And hearing about the death of Pandu, a pall of doom enveloped the entire area, and seeing those children bitterly crying, the crowd started weeping and sobbing uncontrollably, for their favorite king Pandu was no more. Vidura cried like a child. He couldn't control himself. Dhritarashtra also cried and remembered the days which he spent with Pandu, where Pandu was his eyes. Without Pandu, he was living in a dark world. It was Pandu who brought brightness into that world, and Pandu who filled the coffers of Hastinapur with those extensive campaigns across the length and breadth of Bharatvarsha. And hearing the death of Pandu, his mother Ambalika came to the gates and cried and sobbed and screamed, my son, and fainted multiple times. And seeing all these people uncontrolled, the residents and the people of Hastinapur also broke down. Bhishma the Pitamaha also was sad, and you could see him crying openly, something which you normally wouldn't see Bhishma do. Kunti and the Pandavas had brought down the remains of Madri and Pandu from the Shatashringa. You may remember we had discussed how a funeral pyre was laid out for Pandu in the Shatashringa, and Madri sat in the lotus position at his feet holding his toe. And when the flames engulfed her, a shriek came out of her, and then she calmed down and cooled down, knowing that she was going to be with her husband, and she followed him in death. But it had just become spring in the Shatashringa from a tough, hard winter. And there was moisture in the wood, and there was moisture everywhere. And the bodies didn't burn properly, because of which the bodies remained unburnt and the remains were well preserved by the rishis of Shatashringa. They put some herbs and sandalwood paste and wrapped the bodies tight and brought the bodies down to the plains and to the kingdom. And so Dhritarashtra took charge. He instructed his brother Vidura that no expense should be spared in giving a royal funeral for his dear brother Pandu, his younger brother Pandu. That the funeral should befit the Rajahamsa Pandu that he was, the great Kshatriya Pandu that he was. And Dhritarashtra said that there should be people giving out gold, coins, jewels, robes, and land to everyone in the kingdom, for that was the greatness of Pandu, for it was Pandu who had filled the coffers of Hastinapur. And it was decided that a funeral like no other should be conducted for Pandu. But the pall of doom that settled over all of Hastinapur was marred by a bunch of people who were smirking, laughing, joking, and having a good time. They were the sons of Dhritarashtra, the Kauravas led by Duryodhana. Very unsightly behavior to have in such solemn occasions, but that's the type of people they were, led by their eldest brother Duryodhana, who used to be called Suyodhana in the Mahabharata in the earlier times, but later, because of his attitude, the name Duryodhana stuck. And so, based on what Dhritarashtra had ordered, Vidura concurred with Bhishma and decided that the best way to conduct the wedding would be to have the great Veda Vyasa to come and supervise it and to solemnize it. For there was no greater rishi at that time in Bharatvarsha than Veda Vyasa. And Veda Vyasa was also Pandu's biologic father. So Satyavati was asked to summon Veda Vyasa to Hastinapur to conduct the last rites, and preparations began in all earnest. The preparations for the royal funeral for Pandu and Madri are described in great detail in the Mahabharata. And it's quite something that the preparations for the funeral and the actual ceremonies that were to be performed 7,000 years ago have not changed much even today. Today, we follow the same protocols, we follow the same ceremonies as was done 7,000 years ago. A continuous line of ceremonies being done over 7,000 years. Remarkable. And so Vidura and Bhishma went to the Ganga, found a large clearing along the banks of the Janvi where this funeral could take place. Dhritarashtra told Vidura that Kunti should take charge of Madri's body and that neither Vayu nor Surya should even have a glimpse of Madri's body, and respect should be shown for Madri's body. And Kunti took charge of Madri's remains and wrapped Madri up after smearing the body with sandalwood paste and various other herbs to keep the body fresh. A group of priests from the palace then went to the clearing on the banks of the Ganga, which was the demarcated site for the funeral, with an ornamental vase with a fire burning in it, fed by the freshest of ghee to that area, clarified butter, to the area to purify the area before the funeral. This was followed by Pandu's body being anointed with sandalwood paste and various herbs and wrapped delicately and adorned with the ornaments and the royal silks of the palace. He looked so handsome, even though there was a slight charring of the body. And the body of Pandu was placed on a bier, a thatched structure on which the bodies would be carried and placed next, and Madri's body was placed next to his. A group of sturdy men came there to lift the two bodies in unison, and the procession started going through the streets of Hastinapur. It was led by priests in white robes, holding the sacrificial fires in multiple vessels, adorned with the most beautiful of jewels, and fed with ghee or clarified butter at regular intervals to keep the fire burning and fresh. This was followed by the young Pandava boys sobbing their hearts out. And behind that, in the procession, were thousands and thousands of the residents of the Hastinapur kingdom. The royal flag, the royal standard unfurled in front of the bier and regally swayed in the breeze. And all around the bier were yak tails, whisks of yak tails fluttering in the breeze. It was a festive and joyous atmosphere, not a dull and solemn one. Yes, people were sobbing, but the colors were bright and expressive. For death is a release. As said in the Mrityunjaya mantra, Mrityur mokshya mamratat. Free me from the bondage of death. Release me from the bondage of death. For death is a release, not a bondage. I don't want immortality. I want the freedom from the bondage of death. And that was what was conveyed in this funeral procession. There were palace attendants and servitors lining the streets, standing next to cartloads of gold coins and jewels of the most exquisite nature and the most beautiful silks, distributing it freely among the citizens of Hastinapur as they walked behind the funeral procession. And as was said, land was distributed to the people in abundance so that they could take up their farming in the name of Pandu, who gave them everything they had when he was king of Hastinapur. And as this procession wound around its way through the streets of Hastinapur, people would see the Pandava brothers crying and sobbing, and Ambalika fainting at regular intervals, screaming for her son, for she was such a loving woman and she loved that son. And through his life, she offered her all her love for him and for Dhritarashtra and Vidura. And it broke their heart that their aunt was crying so. And the great sage Vedavyasa was waiting at the banks of the Ganga, the anointed spot, waiting for the procession to arrive, deep in thought. And when the procession arrived, Pandu was taken out from the bier, laid down on the floor next to Madri. His ornaments and silk clothes were taken out, and his body anointed with sandalwood paste and petals of flowers and herbs, and then covered delicately with a homespun white cotton cloth. And he looked almost alive in that scenario. And then both of them were placed on the funeral pyre. And amidst the chanting of hymns and the chanting of mantras all around by the various rishis gathered there under the supervision and the control of Veda Vyasa, the eldest Pandava Yudhishthira, helped by his brothers, lit the funeral pyre, and they broke down sobbing again, and Ambalika fainted again and again, and the people thronging there broke down seeing these boys take their father on his last journey. Throughout the process, Vedavyasa had a very concerned look on his face. You could say he was disturbed about something. The function went on as was expected, and the Pandavas, after the funeral pyre burnt, lay down on the bare earth next to that clearing, and for the next 12 days they spent their days next to their father's funeral pyre. And the residents of Hastinapur, seeing these young boys sleep on bare earth, when they went home, they also eschewed the luxury of their beds and slept on the bare, cold, hard ground in their homes. And 12 days passed, with the boys bitterly crying for all those 12 days for their father and mother, for they missed them so much. They were all they had for the 15 years of their lives that they spent in Shatashringa. And then Vedavyasa ordered that on the 12th day, a Shraddha ceremony would be conducted, where absolutions would be given to the dead and departed to offer Tarpana and Pinda for their souls so that they would go to the next world in honor and in purity. And hymns were chanted all across Hastinapur on the 12th day, followed by a grand feast to be given to all the residents of Hastinapur. And this was the purification of that follows a death. Following this, the Pandava brothers were also purified from the sin of a death of their father, and then they were allowed to enter the palace of Hastinapur. Vedavyasa then went to meet his mother, Satyavati. He had a very deep discussion with her. He spoke to Satyavati of all the omens he had seen and all the visions he had seen when he was in the Himalayas, just before Pandu's death and in that period following Pandu's death. He described to her how these omens were evil and horrendous, that prophesied a dissolution of the great kingdom of Hastinapur in a war that would cause the death of millions of innocent people at the crack of the ages, at a time when the Dwapara Yuga was coming to an end and when the Kali Yuga would be about to start. And he explained to her that during the time of the entire ceremony that was conducted on the banks of the Ganga, he was clearly observing the sons of Dhritarashtra, the Kaurava brothers, and he saw pure evil in them. And he knew that there will be a fight of dharma coming up shortly, a fight of dharma between the sons of Dhritarashtra and the sons of Pandu, where he predicted the sons of Pandu were virtuous and righteous, and they would be on the side of dharma. And the sons of Dhritarashtra were evil and covetous, and they would be on the side of adharma. And there would be a war that would happen in a few years that would lead to the decimation of the people, the Kshatriya race of Bharatvarsha. Then he told his mother, "Mother, you've lived a sinless and pious life. You will not be able to bear the hatred that you will see coming and arising in front of you. You will not be able to bear the harm and hurt to this land that you love so much. I think it is time you look at Vanaprasthan." Vanaprasthan is one of the stages of the life of a person. It begins as a brahmachari and then goes to a grihastha, the married life. It begins as a bachelor and goes to grihastha, which is the married life. And then when you completed your duties to your children, to your society, and to everyone around you, and led a full and healthy life with benefit to the society, you then go to the forest. That's the Vanaprasthan. And eventually in the forest, you realize that all these material things that you've gained over the years mean nothing. And you give up everything one by one and reach the stage of a sannyasin and finally attain samadhi and moksha. And this is what Vedavyasa explained to Satyavati. Satyavati was taken aback. She was quite shocked. She couldn't believe that she would cease to be the queen one day. And then the realization set in that there will come a time when she will no longer be queen. She was already seeing the signs around her. The king Dhritarashtra stopped coming to her for advice. The only one who actually came to her once in a while was the great Bhishma. And she saw the evilness that came around the Kaurava brothers, and she knew that what Vedavyasa was saying was very true. For once, she totally believed Vedavyasa. If you remember the earlier times when Vedavyasa would predict something, she would dismiss it as, no, it's not going to happen. But this time she believed him in entirely. And then she called her daughters-in-law, Ambika and Ambalika, and asked Vedavyasa to recount to them what he said. And Vedavyasa repeated everything to them. And he told them also that it's time that you too go for the Vanaprasthan. Satyavati was quite sure that Ambika would stay back because her son Dhritarashtra was the king, and Ambalika would obviously come because Ambalika was heartbroken at the death of Pandu. But to her surprise, Ambika too immediately said that she wanted to go with Satyavati to the forest. Ambika's life was a terrible life. The day the great Bhishma whisked the three sisters and brought them to Hastinapur, they were excited. And then she married Vichitravirya and spent the best 7 years of her life with him. But the day he died, her life changed for the worse. She remembered the night she had to spend with Vedavyasa, a night that still came up in her nightmares. And that was followed by the birth of a blind child, Dhritarashtra. And life was not comfortable after the birth of Dhritarashtra. He always had a bit of meanness to him, which was probably reflected by the lack of love she showed him. The meanness was not overly visible to a lot of people, but Ambika could see it in him. And over time, with the birth of the Kauravas, she saw that they used to mock her and tease her and talk bad, evil things behind her back. And she knew that she was no longer the mother of a king. She was just a lady who was there in the palace. And she just wanted to get away from this palace of horrors. the city of elephants, Hastinapur, and she readily agreed to come with Satyavati and Ambalika. Ambalika, of course, didn't have a doubt she was definitely going to the forest with Satyavati. And then Vedavyasa left. Satyavati then called Bhishma. She told Bhishma everything that Vedavyasa had told her. And Bhishma asked her, is this exactly the words Vedavyasa used, the Maharishi Vedavyasa used? And Satyavati said, yes, these were his exact words. And then she saw a side of Bhishma she had never seen before. He held her hand, tears welled up in his eyes and started flowing down, wetting her hand. He wasn't sobbing, but they were tears of sadness, and it surprised her. Satyavati and Bhishma were two of the stalwarts of this Hastinapur kingdom. Emotionally, they were the strongest in the kingdom. Mentally, they were the most stable. They took all decisions with calmness and equanimity. They were absolutely cool and calm in the way they conducted the affairs. They were the solid rock that you could go to when you were in trouble. And seeing Bhishma break down, Satyavati knew what Bhishma was going to say. And Bhishma told her mother, I am tired. I've been given a blessing by my father that I can take my life at the time and place and manner of my choosing. And I would like to exercise that right now. And I would like to come with you to the forest for the Vanaprasthan. I'm tired, mother. Let me come with you. So let's put things into perspective. What was Bhishma's age at this time when the Pandavas returned to Hastinapur? So going by conservative age-related estimates, we know that Ganga brought Devavrata down from Devaloka when Devavrata was 16, and he ruled as a Yuvaraja till he was 20. And 20 is when he went to the fishing village of Satyavati's father to talk to Satyavati's father for Satyavati's hand for his father Shantanu. At that time, he was a young 20-year-old lad. And he brought Satyavati home, and in 3 years, Satyavati had Vichitravirya. For Chitrangada was the older brother. So Bhishma was 23 when Vichitravirya was born. And you had a conservative estimate of 23 years when Vichitravirya got married. For when he got married, the Kashi sisters were 18, 20, and 22. Amba, Ambika, and Ambalika respectively. So Vichitravirya would have been around 23. And so Bhishma would have been around 46 years of age when Vichitravirya got married, when he went as a swashbuckling hero to Kashi to bring the 3 princesses back. And then we add another 7 years that Vichitravirya lived and had a great life with Ambika and Ambalika, and that would make Bhishma's age around 53 when Vichitravirya died. And so it would be another 2 years when Pandu was born. So Bhishma would be around 55 when Pandu was born, for there was a year's gap between Dhritarashtra and Pandu. And from that age on, if you consider that Pandu would have been 23 when he went on his campaigns and conquered the length and breadth of Bharat Varsha, and then come back from those campaigns and then married Kunti and Madri. It's a very conservative estimate. Would be another 21 to 23 years, which a conservative estimate, Bhishma would be around 76 at the time of Pandu's marriage. And then if you add another 4 years when he went to Shatashringa and spent 4 years before the eldest one, Yudhishthira, was born, that would make Bhishma 80. So the time when Yudhishthira was born, the eldest Pandava, Bhishma was a grand old man at 80. And then you take another 15 years when they came back to Hastinapur, Bhishma would be 95. So Bhishma was a ripe old grandsire at 95 when the Pandavas came back to Hastinapur. And Satyavati would have been a year or two younger to him at 93 or 94, probably. And so it was true that Bhishma was tired of running the kingdom in everyone's name. And he wanted the release of death, and so he told Satyavati, "Let me accompany you to the forest." And Satyavati probably at that time took her revenge on Bhishma. She looked at Bhishma and said, with probably a glint in her eye, "You kept all those oaths all these years, but you forgot this one oath that you had given to your father, that you would take care of the kingdom of Hastinapur till the very end. You should obey the oath now." And Bhishma sighed, for he knew what his duty was. And Satyavati said, "It hurts our heart that the one thing dear to us all, to us both, the most dear thing to us both, the kingdom of Hastinapur, is destined to come to an end at the crack of the ages. The one thing that we cherished and the one thing that we held true to us is going to come to an end. Please, Bhishma, I request you, take care of this kingdom as much as you can. You can see the Kaurava brothers are evil, and the young Pandavas will need all the help they can get to take this course of dharma forward. Be there for them, dear Bhishma. Take this responsibility of taking care of the young, innocent Pandava boys and ensure that dharma prevails in this kingdom once and for all. Please, for all our sakes, do that." And Bhishma agreed. Satyavati then announced in the kingdom that she, Ambika and Ambalika, would be going on their Vanaprasthan. There were tears all around, and there was grieving all around, and people requesting her not to go. But Satyavati had made up her mind, and the only one who stood stoic at the end of it was Bhishma, for he envied the other three. And so Satyavati, Ambika, and Ambalika went forth into the forest. From a life of pravritti, they went to a life of nivritti. That is to give up everything they had. From a life of material pleasure and material wealth, they gave up everything and attained vairagya. And eventually, one day in the forest, Satyavati's Atma left her. This was followed by Ambika and Ambalika shortly afterwards. And that was the end of a generation, an end of a legacy of Hastinapur, the Queen Mother Satyavati who commanded respect and who shaped the course of the events of the Kurukshetra war, which probably led to the Kurukshetra war. That was the end of Satyavati. Om Namah Shivaya. Om Nagendraya Namaha. Om Amme Narayana. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ganeshaya Namaha. Om Anjanaya Namaha. Om Guruve Namaha. Swami Sharanamayyappo. Om Subramanyaya Namaha.